In the summer of 1985, newlyweds Natalie and Eric Wren boarded a Mississippi riverboat cruise and were never seen again. For nearly 3 decades, their disappearance remained unsolved until a brutal storm in 2013 unclogged a storm drain and exposed something that reignited the case and revealed a long-buried conspiracy. Natalie Corwin became Natalie Wren on a soft summer Saturday in June 1985. The ceremony took place in her hometown of Quincy, Illinois, beneath a weathered white gazebo wrapped in roses and baby's breath. It was modest, but joyful, filled with laughter, mason jars of lemonade and sparklers lit before dusk. Eric Wren, tall and lean with a soft southern drawl, had proposed after only 6 months of dating. When he'd said with a shrug, neither came from wealth, but together they saved for a honeymoon that felt like something out of a storybook. A 3-night cruise on the Celestine, an old paddle-wheel riverboat restored for romantic journeys down the Mississippi. It promised creaking wood, starlit decks, live jazz, and the illusion of stepping backward in time. They boarded in St. Louis on June 10th, carrying a single suitcase, Natalie's camera bag, and a red duffel with snacks and books. Eric wore a powder blue blazer that didn't quite fit. Natalie had her hair pinned up with her grandmother's combs and clutched a tiny silver compact mirror, engraved with her initials, N.C. The Celestine was an aging beauty, with velvet curtains, brass railings, and a captain known for storytelling more than sailing. Captain Burl Harlan had steered the boat for 2 decades and treated every guest like a long-lost friend. He welcomed Natalie and Eric aboard with a wink and a joke about love being the second most dangerous thing on this river next to gambling. Their first day was everything they'd hoped, slow drifting past willows, sipping iced tea on the observation deck, dancing to a 3-piece band in the ballroom. Natalie took photos of riverbanks and sunlit cabins along the shore. Eric tried to teach her blackjack in the smoky parlor room. By night 2, they'd settled into the rhythm of the boat. Natalie, ever the planner, asked the purser when the ship would reach its next port. "A tiny town called Minter's Ferry," he said. "Not much there, some antiques, an old bar general store. We'll dock for a few hours before heading south again." Natalie made a note to explore, but they never would. On the morning of June 13th, when the boat arrived at the next scheduled stop, the Wrens were gone. Their cabin was empty. Their suitcase sat unopened at the foot of the bed. Natalie's camera was on the nightstand, film still inside. The red duffel had vanished. At first, the crew assumed the couple had disembarked early, possibly at Minter's Ferry. But the dockmaster there had no record of any passengers leaving, and no sightings of the Wrens in town. Captain Harlan reported the disappearance to the River Patrol. The Celestine was delayed and searched twice. Cabins, common areas, storage rooms, even the boiler room. Nothing. The passenger manifest listed all 32 guests accounted for at the final docking, except Natalie and Eric. No one had seen them leave. The ship's logs showed no unscheduled stops, no alarms, no radio calls. Authorities from multiple states, Missouri, Illinois, and Louisiana, joined the investigation, but the river offered no clues, no bodies, no personal effects, no sightings at bus depots or train stations. The Wrens had vanished. Natalie's parents were inconsolable. She would never just run, her mother said through tears. She had a job, a home, a cat she loved like a child. Eric's father was quieter, more reserved. He was proud of that boat ticket, he told reporters. Called it the most romantic thing he'd ever done. Reporters latched onto the mystery. "Honeymoon on the haunted riverboat," one headline read. Another dubbed the couple the Mississippi Ghost Newlyweds. Theories flooded in. Some said the couple staged their own disappearance. Others blamed the river a tragic accident, a stumble off the deck in the night. But there were no splashes heard, no cries, and the boat never stopped. Eventually, the search was called off. The Celestine kept sailing. Passengers kept boarding. and the Wrens became another story whispered on the water. Captain Burl Harlan sat in a cracked leather armchair in his parlor the day the investigators came aboard the Celestine. The boat had been moored just south of Baton Rouge, delayed for the first time in years, while officers paced the decks and interviewed his staff. He was calm, collected, maybe too much so. "I've had passengers skip off early before," he said, puffing his pipe with practiced nonchalance. "Lovers quarrel, second thoughts, whatever it is. It ain't unusual." Detective Randall Hicks, a veteran from the Missouri River Patrol, didn't buy it. "They left their luggage, their camera, and their cash. You think they just slipped away in the night?" Burl squinted. "Could have been swept overboard. River's dark. Has a hunger to it." Hicks frowned. "Nobody heard a splash." "No one listens on these boats," Detective Burl replied. "Too busy pretending they're in a dream. The Celestine was built for charm, not safety. Narrow decks, loose railings, creaky gangways. But the idea that two healthy adults could fall overboard unnoticed and leave behind everything seemed implausible." Investigators canvassed the remaining 30 guests. Some remembered seeing Natalie and Eric on the second night dancing and laughing. Others remembered them during the sunset cruise holding hands on the upper deck. But after 9 p.m., no one could confirm anything. No arguments, no noise, just absence. The crew was cooperative mostly. The purser, Ellis Finch, reported nothing unusual. The two bartenders swore the couple left the ballroom before midnight. The engine man said he never saw them after dinner. The only one who seemed off was a new deckhand hired just that week. Jonas J.T. Toller, 23, lanky, twitchy, and already on thin ice. He'd been caught drinking from a guest's private stash on night 1. When questioned, he was evasive. "Didn't talk to him," he muttered. "Barely saw him." But when pressed on his duties, he contradicted himself several times, first saying he worked the forward deck after dark, then claiming he was below in the boiler room. He was dismissed from the crew a few days later for failing a routine check-in. His file went with him, or so it seemed. The investigation reviewed security records at each of the boat's previous stops, but no trace of Natalie or Eric appeared in ticket logs, surveillance cameras, or town ledgers. Hicks had a theory. What if they never made it to Minter's Ferry at all? They re-examined the ship's logs. The Celestine had departed St. Louis and made 2 scheduled landings, one at Highwater Bend, a scenic overlook popular for breakfast picnics, and another at Minter's Ferry. But when they compared the travel time between ports and the ship's manifest of fuel consumption and engine logs, something didn't line up. There was an unexplained 4-hour gap on the night of June 12th. No notes in the log. No reason for delay. Hicks noted. No mechanical issues reported. But the boat didn't move for nearly 4 hours between 2:15 and 6:00 a.m. Burl claimed it was likely a navigational pause fog on the water river debris. "Sometimes we wait it out. Ain't no hurry down the Mississippi." But fog was never reported by the Coast Guard that night. And there were no logs of radio communication from the Celestine requesting clearance or aid. The boat had stopped somewhere. But where? Maps were studied. Hicks marked out several unofficial river landings, mostly private docks or long-abandoned ferries. One spot stood out: Fletcher's Wharf, a decaying wooden platform tucked in a bend 35 miles north of Minter's Ferry. Once a bustling trading post, it had been closed since the 1950s, its only visitors now fishermen and trespassers. Hicks arranged for a dive team to scan the area. Nothing was found, and with no bodies, no witnesses, and no firm timeline, the investigation ran aground. By September 1985, the Wrens were declared missing persons, suspected drowned. The media attention faded. The Celestine resumed cruises. Burl Harlan kept sailing, telling tales of the river, including a sanitized version of the missing honeymooners. "Spirits of the water," he'd say with a wink, "always taking what they want." Natalie's compact mirror, silver engraved, cherished, remained listed among her missing belongings, until it surfaced 28 years later. In the most unexpected place imaginable, a rust-choked storm drain in Lafayette, Louisiana. June 23, 2013, Lafayette, Louisiana. The storm had pummeled the city for nearly a full day, lightning that fractured the sky, winds that broke branches like twigs, and rainfall that overwhelmed the gutters in minutes. Streets became rivers, basements flooded, sirens wailed through the night. As the sun rose behind a wall of gray clouds, the public works crews moved in to clear debris and unclog drains. It was routine work after a summer storm, though never pleasant. One such crew was working on the north side of town, where a storm drain near Willow and Burton had backed up and sent foul-smelling runoff into the neighborhood yards. An assistant engineer named Carla Denton took the lead. She popped the iron grate with a crowbar and peered inside with a flashlight. The drain was half clogged with mud leaves and something shiny wedged between two iron bars near the bend. She reached for it with gloved hands, pried it free, and held it up. It was small silver, rounded no larger than a coaster, engraved with delicate scrolling initials NC. "Looks like a woman's makeup mirror," she said aloud. "But damn, this thing's old." She opened it. The inside was clouded with grime, but beneath the residue a cracked mirror and a faded blotter puff sat in place. The outside was tarnished but intact. On the back, a faint inscription: "To Natalie for all the reflections to come. Eric, 6985. Carla paused. The names felt familiar. That evening, curious, she Googled them. The search brought her to an archive of unsolved cases. Newlyweds vanish on Mississippi riverboat, June 1985. Her chest tightened. She submitted the item to the Lafayette Police Department the next morning. Detective Hugo Rivas, recently transferred from Baton Rouge, took the case. A veteran with a quiet disposition and a low tolerance for dead ends, Rivas knew the river's lore. But he also knew when something wasn't just coincidence. He ordered the mirror sent to the state forensics lab. Weeks later, results confirmed aged fingerprints on the compact's casing matched Natalie Wren's 1984 driver's license record. The compact was authentic, no doubt about it. But the real question was, how did it get there? The location of the storm drain was more than 300 miles downstream from where the Celestine had last docked. The mirror hadn't floated there on its own. Someone had transported it. Detective Rivas dug into the original case files, requesting documents from both Missouri and Louisiana jurisdictions. The trail was dusty, disorganized, and incomplete, but not erased. And among the items cataloged as missing from the couple's belongings was the silver compact. Natalie had kept it on her at all times. That detail struck him on her person. For the compact to end up in a storm drain 28 years later, one of two things had to be true. 1. Natalie survived and somehow made her way south alone. 2. Someone else had kept it all this time and only recently discarded it. Rivas had a hunch it was the latter. The condition of the mirror was too well preserved. It hadn't spent decades rusting in the drain. It was dropped recently. He had the storm drain excavated further. Deep within the debris, crews recovered a fragment of a black trash bag. Inside it, decayed paper with faint handwriting. One phrase was still legible. The boat stopped near the wharf. He wasn't the captain. The rest had dissolved. Rivas pored over the Celestine's passenger and crew lists from 1985. He reconstructed the timeline, the river path, and every port call. One name on the crew list, Jonas Toller, the dismissed deckhand, jumped out. He had no follow-up interviews, no contact post-dismissal. Rivas ran a background check. Toller had racked up several minor charges in the years since public intoxication, petty theft, but nothing serious. He'd changed his name in 1999 to John T. Dorsey and had recently been living in Lafayette, in a mobile home 3 blocks from the storm drain. Rivas paid him a visit. The man who opened the door was thin, hollow-eyed, and reeked of old beer. His hands trembled. When asked if he knew Natalie or Eric Wren, he said nothing. But on a table behind him, under a pile of magazines, sat a photo. Natalie smiling in her wedding dress. Rivas arrested him on the spot. During interrogation, Toller cracked almost immediately. He didn't admit to murder. Not directly. But he did say this: "I didn't think it would come back. I thought after all these years, the river had done what it always does, keeps secrets." When asked about the mirror, he looked away. "I kept it. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't throw it in the water." Not that. She loved it. Detective Rivas leaned forward. "Then why toss it in a storm drain?" Toller's voice cracked. "Because she kept showing up in my dreams. Looking for it." Jonas Toller, alias John T. Dorsey, wasn't charged with murder, not yet. Not with the evidence they had. But his admission was enough to hold him on suspicion of obstruction and possession of evidence in an open missing persons case. The media caught wind of his arrest quickly. Breakthrough in 1985. Riverboat mystery storm drain. Clue ties man to vanished couple. Reporters descended on Lafayette while national true crime shows began prepping retrospective specials. Detective Hugo Rivas kept his focus tight. He wanted one thing: the truth. Not headlines. Not speculation. He pressed Toller in a second interview, this time with a digital recorder rolling. "You said you didn't throw the mirror in the water. Why not?" Toller stared at the table. "It was hers. I didn't mean for any of it." He said it wouldn't go that far. Who? Rivas asked. "Captain Harlan." Toller flinched. "No. Not him. The other one. The guy in the blue hat. There's no one listed on the crew manifest matching that description." "He wasn't on the manifest," Toller said. "That's the point." Rivas leaned forward. "Start from the beginning. What happened the night the Wrens disappeared?" Toller was silent for a long time. Then he began. "It started with a favor. There was this guy said he was a contractor or something. He boarded with the passengers but kept to himself. Paid me under the table to help him offload a few crates at a stop we weren't supposed to make. Told me it was nothing illegal, just didn't want it on record." "Where was the stop?" "Fletcher's Wharf," Toller said. "About 4 hours upstream from Minter's Ferry. We pulled in just before 3:00 a.m. That was the 4-hour gap in the logs. The unscheduled stop the Celestine had never reported." "What happened there?" Rivas asked. Toller rubbed his face. "I helped him unload 2 crates. That's when I saw them, Natalie and Eric. They'd come out on the deck. Natalie was asking why we weren't moving. 'What did the man do?' He panicked," Toller said. "Told me not to worry, that he'd handle it. Said he'd take care of it. I thought. I didn't know he meant." "Did you see him hurt them?" "No," Toller said. "But I heard something. A struggle. Then nothing." He swallowed hard. The next morning he was gone. So were they. And Captain Harlan. He didn't see it. Or he acted like he didn't. We were told to say the couple must have disembarked early. Rivas filed a subpoena for Celestine's decommissioning records and maintenance logs. The boat had been retired in 1996 and sold to a private collector who docked it in New Orleans. The collector, a preservationist named Robert Langston, granted Rivas access to the ship. On a humid July morning, Rivas boarded the Celestine for the first time. The riverboat had decayed. The red trim had faded to brown windows clouded with mildew. But the bones were still there: the ballroom, the dining deck, and the narrow hall of crew quarters. Langston guided him to the starboard cabins. "This one was sealed when I bought the ship," he said. "Smelled like death. We never used it. It was cabin B12. The lock was rusted. Rivas broke it with a pry bar. Inside, the room was stripped bare. The walls bore stains. But when he tapped along the floorboards, one gave a hollow knock. He peeled back a warped plank. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with tape, was a journal. Rivas opened it carefully. The first page was signed, E.W. Eric Wren. The pages were smudged, watermarked, and faded, but legible enough. The entries told a fragmentary tale. "That man, he's not a passenger. He was already on board when we got here. Natalie says he's been watching us. We hear footsteps above our cabin at night even when the deck is supposed to be empty. Saw him talking to a crew member kid with a limp. They stopped when I got close. Last night I caught him outside our door, pretending to be drunk. He had a key. I know it. Natalie wants to leave at the next port. Can't shake the feeling we're not going to make it. Riva sat down hard on the cabin bunk. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a lovesick couple jumping ship or slipping overboard. It was calculated. He sent the journal for preservation and DNA testing. Natalie's hair sample from the compact case found in Toller's trailer was matched to the hair found in the cabin walls. It placed her in cabin B12 the night she disappeared. Langston handed Rivas another item one overlooked for years, a set of keys recovered during the restoration. The tag read, Engine Maint BH. Burl Harlan Rivas murmured. The captain had claimed to know nothing. But he had a key to a cabin sealed for decades and a maintenance crew who'd included a man that wasn't on any manifest. It was time to pay the old captain a visit. Captain Burl Harlan had retired in 1997 after 30 years steering riverboats, and by 2013 he was 81 years old, mostly confined to a rocking chair on the porch of his daughter's home in Covington, Louisiana. His skin was weathered, his eyes a pale gray like driftwood. He still wore a captain's cap most days, even though he hadn't set foot on a river in over a decade. Detective Hugo Rivas found him sipping sweet tea and watching the rain drip from magnolia leaves. Captain Harlan Rivas asked, gently approaching the porch. That's me, Harlan said, not looking away from the trees. Though most folks just call me Old Burl these days. Rivas introduced himself and showed his badge. The old man sighed, eyes narrowing. Took longer than I expected. You knew this day was coming. I figured if the river didn't bury it deep enough, someone would come sniffing eventually. Rivas sat on the porch railing, notebook in hand. I'm reopening the Wren case, he said. Natalie and Eric. My 1985. Honeymoon cruise on the Celestine. Harlan sipped his tea. Pretty girl. Polite. He was a little tense. Always watching things. You claimed they disembarked at Minter's Ferry, because that's what the report said to say. Rivas stiffened. Who told you that? Harlan finally turned to meet his eyes. There was someone on that boat I didn't hire. He came on with the guests, used a false name. I found out on day 2, brought it to Ellis the purser. Told me not to stir it up. You're saying your own staff covered it up. Ellis said the man had connections. Real ones. That if I pushed, we'd all be in trouble. Rivas frowned. What was his name? He went by Granger. Said he was doing a river survey. But he never carried maps, never asked questions. Just watched people. Talked to Toller a lot. Had a way of leaning in like he was giving orders instead of asking favors. Do you think he was involved in the Wren's disappearance? I think he planned it. Or at least knew it was going to happen. I didn't see him after that night. Why didn't you report it? Harlan laughed bitterly. You think anyone would have believed an old river captain over some guy with a government badge? Rivas paused. You think he was law enforcement? I think he was something. Or someone who wanted to pretend. The conversation shifted. Rivas presented the journal Eric's found beneath the floorboards. Harlan read the entries with a slow shake of his head. I thought they'd just run. Maybe got scared. But this says they knew something, and you still didn't speak up, Rivas said quietly. I kept the boat running, Harlan replied. That's what I did. That's all I knew to do. Back in Lafayette, Rivas compiled the new evidence. Toller's confession and the recovered compact, Eric's journal and its warning, Harlan's admission of a mystery passenger, and a coordinated cover-up. The forensic links placing Natalie in cabin B12 the night she vanished. And then came the real break. From the Louisiana Bureau of Identification, a DNA match hit the system. Hair samples from the cabin matched another entry, not Natalie or Eric, but an unknown profile logged in 1994 during an unrelated investigation in Vicksburg. The name Reed Granger, occupation listed private security consultant. No criminal record, no active ID, no recent location. But he had been real, and he had been on that boat. Rivas tracked down the retired officer who filed the 1994 sample. It turned out Granger had been briefly held for questioning during a weapons trafficking investigation, then released with no explanation. Someone had pulled strings. Rivas now had a target, a man who had likely orchestrated the cover-up, possibly murdered 2 honeymooners, and vanished into the system. But without a body, he couldn't charge him. Without direct witness testimony, he couldn't place him at the scene with certainty. And then he remembered something Harlan had said. He talked to Toller a lot. Rivas returned to Toller's holding cell. He slid a printed photo across the table, a blurry image of Granger from 1994. "Is this the man you saw on the boat?" Toller looked for a long time, then gave a slow, shivering nod. "He's the one who told me to say they left early." "Did you see him with Natalie or Eric?" Toller swallowed. "I saw him follow Natalie down the corridor that night. I never saw her come back." The case file thickened. Rivas submitted the name Reed Granger for a federal BOLO B on the lookout alert. But the trail had grown cold. Still, the pieces were aligning. The Celestine had made an unscheduled stop at a forgotten dock. A man using a false identity had boarded under government cover. 2 passengers vanished without trace. And now, nearly 3 decades later, their final moments were whispering back through journal pages and rusted silver. The river had kept its secrets, but not forever. Detective Hugo Rivas stood over the Mississippi River once more, this time not as a dreamer or investigator, but as a man confronting a tide of ghosts. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting the water in bruised oranges and reds, the kind of sky Natalie Wren might have once photographed through her lens, the kind Eric Wren might have pointed to, describing shapes in the clouds. The past wasn't drifting anymore, it was closing in. Rivas had turned the Celestine case into a full interagency investigation. The Department of Justice reviewed the compiled evidence, the journal Toller's confession, Harlan's testimony, and most crucially, the DNA match to Reed Granger. Yet despite his notoriety, Granger had disappeared completely after 1997. His last known residence was a P.O. box in Biloxi. His last verified photo came from a background ID check in 1994. He was a ghost, a trained one. The DOJ confirmed Granger's name appeared in classified contract rosters for the Office of Naval Intelligence and a now defunct domestic surveillance unit. The paper trail ended abruptly. Rivas suspected he'd gone rogue years earlier, but in cases this old prosecution wasn't always the goal. Sometimes the goal was truth, and he was finally getting close. While processing the last of the archived materials from Celestine's decommissioning, a preservationist discovered something unexpected. Wedged deep inside the paneling of the ballroom bar, a hidden storage cavity behind the old icebox, warped by time and nearly sealed by age. Inside was a manila folder. Rivas was called immediately. Within the folder were 6 black and white photographs, aged but sharp, and a single folded napkin from the Celestine's bar with scribbled coordinates. The photos were surveillance-style grainy images of passengers on the deck, Natalie and Eric among them. In one, Natalie stood alone at the railing, clearly startled mid-turn. Behind her in the shadows loomed a man with sunglasses and a square jaw. Granger. The napkin bore numbers that corresponded to a location near a swampy, overgrown bend of the Mississippi just north of Fletcher's Wharf. Rivas assembled a team. They arrived with floodlights and ground-penetrating radar. The coordinates led them to a crumbling hunting shack nearly swallowed by the woods. Moss clung to the roof like a crown. The interior was bare but intact, dusty cots, rusted tools, a disused fire barrel. But the real discovery was underground. Behind the shack, hidden beneath collapsed brush and reeds, was a root cellar. Locked, reinforced, still sealed. They cracked it open. The air inside was sour, stale, unnaturally cold. And on the floor, wrapped in tarp and decayed twine, were 2 skeletal remains side by side. One still wore the tattered remains of a linen blouse. In the bundle, a wedding band, a rusted money clip, and the camera Natalie had brought with her on the Celestine. The film was water-damaged, but Riva sent it for recovery. DNA confirmed the identities Natalie and Eric Wren. After 28 years, they had finally been found. The medical examiner reported blunt force trauma to the skull on both victims. The weapon likely a metal pipe or similar object. No signs of restraint. No defensive wounds. They had been attacked from behind. The case, once a cold whisper beneath the river's surface, now roared. Granger had murdered them, premeditated, covered it up with help willing or coerced from Toller and others, used his government credentials to vanish. Rivas issued a final case report that ran 81 pages. But he wasn't done. 2 weeks later, an anonymous envelope arrived at the sheriff's department. No return address, no note. Inside was a single photo, a recent one printed from a cheap color printer. It showed a man, older, heavier, grayer, sitting at a roadside diner somewhere near Flagstaff, Arizona. The timestamp was only 3 weeks old. Scrawled on the back, the river gives. You just have to look. Rivas forwarded it to the U.S. Marshals Service. They launched a quiet manhunt. Back in Darrow Hollow, Allison Wade attended the funeral of Natalie and Eric Wren. She didn't know them personally, but she knew their story, and it had become part of hers. She stood with the small crowd that gathered along the banks of White Lantern Lake, where a symbolic service was held. Lanterns placed into the water, one final reflection cast into the current. That night, alone in her hotel, she opened a digital folder Rivas had shared privately. Inside were the recovered images from Natalie's camera. Most were blurry, faded, but one stood out. It was a photo of Eric grinning mid-laugh as Natalie captured him on the deck of the Celestine Sunlight, in his eyes joy unfiltered. It was their last moment frozen in silver nitrate. It now lived forever in justice. In the weeks following the discovery of Natalie and Eric Wren's remains, Darrow Hollow, Lafayette, and several small towns along the Mississippi River were once again inundated by headlines, this time with closure instead of questions. Honeymoon, homicide solved after 28 years. The Celestine's final secret revealed what the river kept buried, the mystery of the Wrens. Detective Hugo Rivas, though never one to court attention, was honored quietly by the Louisiana Bureau of Investigations for his persistence. His report became a reference case for modern cold case handling, especially in jurisdictionally complex disappearances. But his mind lingered not on the success, but on the man still missing, Reed Granger. Despite the photo from Arizona and a handful of possible sightings, Granger remained elusive. The U.S. Marshals followed leads through New Mexico, Utah, and Nevada, but each time the trail ran cold. He was a man who had once slipped aboard a riverboat without detection, orchestrated a double murder, and erased himself for nearly 3 decades. It seemed unlikely he'd be caught by chance. Still, there was progress. Rivas worked with federal agents to reopen a case file on Granger's other suspected connections: 2 unsolved disappearances in Texas in the early 1990s, a missing contractor in Ohio in 1987, and a series of silent payouts connected to decommissioned government assets. Patterns emerged, methods repeated. But nothing quite as bold as what he did on the Celestine. As the riverboat mystery gained posthumous fame, an investigative documentary series aired a 3-part special that summer, titled Downriver: The Honeymoon Files. Interviews with Allison Wade Rivas and surviving family members painted a story not only of justice, but of cultural oversight, how charm and tradition can veil darkness in plain sight. In one poignant moment, Allison said, "People think rivers erase everything, but the water always remembers. You just have to wait for the right current." Meanwhile, the site near Fletcher's Wharf, the location of the old shack and root cellar, was purchased by the state and declared a historical crime site. A small black plaque stood at the trail's edge bearing only a few words: "For Natalie and Eric Wren. Taken, found, remembered. At the Cold Case Archive in Darrow Hollow, a new exhibit opened that fall. It displayed the restored compact mirror, a printed image from Natalie's recovered film, the final photo of Eric, a replica of the Celestine's deck map with markings showing the unauthorized detour, a copy of Eric's journal annotated and preserved in glass, and on a looped video, the recovered testimony of Jonas Toller shaking, exhausted, haunted. The most chilling part of his confession wasn't what he remembered. It was what he didn't. "I don't know what happened after she screamed," he said. "He told me to go back to my cabin, said I didn't see anything, said it never happened." When asked why he complied, Toller said, "I believed him. He wore the uniform. He looked like authority. That was enough." The exhibit became a place of both mourning and education. Local schools began including the Wren case in their curriculum when teaching criminal justice history. Journalists cited it as a turning point in how small-town jurisdictions interact with federal oversight. Even tourism picked up with history, walks along the river, stopping at the former Celestine mooring site. For Allison Wade, the case had begun as a curiosity, one more forgotten tragedy in a river of them. But now it had shape faces, a timeline of truth. She stood once more at the river's edge, that winter wind pressing against her coat camera, hanging from her neck. She took a photo of the still water, the clouds above it, and the ripples trailing from a duck's slow paddle. This time there was no mystery, only memory. She uploaded the photo to her blog that evening, titling it, "Reflections from a River That Remembers." Underneath she wrote, "For Natalie and Eric, who taught us that even the deepest secrets cannot stay submerged forever. The current may twist, but it always moves forward, and sometimes it brings the truth with it." Winter turned to spring in Darrow Hollow, and while the trees bloomed anew, the town's perspective had changed. White Lantern Lake, once shrouded in folklore and hushed mentions, had become a place of reverent attention. Visitors walked its perimeter not with fear, but with purpose. Detective Hugo Rivas continued to work in quiet persistence. Even though the Wren case had closed on paper, he kept the Granger file open on his desk. Unsolved, unfinished, unforgiven. In March 2014, a new tip arrived. An elderly woman in Bisbee, Arizona, an innkeeper, called in after watching a rerun of Downriver. She claimed one of the men featured in the story had stayed at her inn the previous fall. "Polite fella," she said. "Used a different name, but he wore sunglasses even indoors and asked about nearby bus stations." Rivas coordinated with U.S. Marshals and state law enforcement. They pulled surveillance from nearby gas stations. One video from a roadside diner off Highway 80 captured a man matching Granger's description. Slight limp, gray beard, baseball cap pulled low. He was still out there, but more than a fugitive, he had become a symbol of institutional oversight, of the dangers of untraceable identities, and of the consequences of ignoring whispers before they become screams. The Wren case's fallout continued in less visible ways, too. 2 former Celestine crew members were subpoenaed in civil suits. One confessed to falsifying logbooks. Another admitted to seeing Natalie and Eric arguing with a man on the top deck hours before they vanished. Though they claimed fear, not malice, prevented them from coming forward, both now lived with the weight of hindsight. Meanwhile, Jonas Toller, once the drunken deckhand, now a remorseful inmate, continued to cooperate with authorities. He provided sketches of Granger rough maps of the Celestine's below-deck layout and descriptions of the hidden compartments the crew used for contraband in the 1980s. "Everything was quiet when he was there," Toller said during a jailhouse interview. "Too quiet. Like the whole boat was holding its breath." A particularly disturbing confession came late one night. "I think he did it before," Toller whispered. "I think Natalie and Eric weren't the first." This prompted the DOJ to revisit other cases from the Mississippi River corridor, disappearances of travelers' runaways, and even 2 unclaimed bodies found near Greenville in 1982. Each lead became part of the expanding Granger pattern, as analysts dubbed it, precise timing, isolation, and short-term embedded presence, typically aboard mobile operations, barges, trains, or buses. Each time he entered without a trace and left just as clean. But in the Wren case, he made a mistake. He left behind witnesses. He underestimated the echo of a compact mirror tossed in panic. In May, the Louisiana legislature passed the River Crime Accountability Act, increasing jurisdictional communication across state lines and enforcing stricter documentation on river-based transport. The law was unofficially dubbed Natalie's Law. For Allison Wade, it was a victory, if a quiet one. She had taken a step back from the public eye, returning to her own writing and photography, but remained on the board of the Lantern Initiative. In a rare interview that summer, she said, "Justice doesn't always wear a badge or bang a gavel. Sometimes it's a photo pulled from a drawer, a voice on a cassette, a name someone refuses to forget." One afternoon, Allison received a package at the archive. No return address, just her name handwritten and a postmark from northern Arizona. Inside a disposable camera, old, filthy, but unopened, a note was taped to it. "Last roll, belonged to her. You'll know what to do." She handed it over to a preservation lab. Of the 24 exposures, only 4 developed cleanly. The first 3 were familiar Natalie and Eric on the boat laughing. Natalie adjusting her hair in the mirror. Eric pointing at something beyond the frame. But the last photo was different. It showed a man sitting alone at the edge of the dock, not looking at the camera, looking at the water. His face was partially in shadow, but it was unmistakable. Reed Granger, alive, and watching the river. The photograph of Reed Granger sitting alone on the dock sent a ripple through every law enforcement agency still chasing his shadow. The timestamp printed in the corner, likely embedded in the film's chemical layer, read 10/14/13, just 2 months after Jonas Toller had discarded Natalie's compact mirror into the Lafayette storm drain. Detective Hugo Rivas examined the image obsessively. Granger's face wasn't fully visible, but the structure, nose, jawline, the slope of his shoulders matched earlier surveillance stills. He wore a beige windbreaker, his hair windswept, and he was seated cross-legged, eyes not on the horizon, but on the water. As if waiting, or perhaps remembering. How the film ended up in that anonymous package remained a mystery. Rivas's best guess was that Granger had developed it himself, or had someone else do it, and then mailed it in a moment of reckoning. Or maybe a taunt. There was no explanation, no letter, just that eerie last image. The photograph was verified and entered into the evidence database. The FBI circulated it to field offices in the Southwest. A few tips came in from Arizona and Utah, most unsubstantiated. One clerk in Santa Fe claimed she'd sold film to a quiet older guy with a coin pouch, who looked like the man in the photo, but the camera was never found. Rivas found himself staring out at the river more than usual. He often thought about what Granger might be doing sitting there on that dock. Was it guilt, satisfaction? Was he saying goodbye? The river didn't answer. In Darrow Hollow, the photo became the final entry in the Celestine exhibit, placed beneath a pane of non-reflective glass, with no description. Just the title, Last Known Image. Visitors often lingered before it. Some said the water behind Granger in the photo looked different. Darker. Like it knew something. In June 2014, Natalie and Eric were reinterred in Quincy, Illinois, in a shared plot beside Natalie's parents. The town came out in quiet support, teachers who had known them, neighbors who still remembered the day they disappeared. Allison stood by the casket as it was lowered, a single white lily in hand. She said no words. She didn't need to. Later, she drove back to Louisiana along the river route they never got to finish. She stopped at old dock towns, bought coffee from roadside stands, took photographs of rusted water towers, derelict marinas, driftwood sculptures left by children. At one stop near Vicksburg, a man with a weathered hat nodded toward her camera. Looking for ghosts. She smiled. No, I found them. The following month, Rivas received an envelope. Inside was a page torn from a travel journal, water-damaged but readable. It had likely belonged to Natalie. The entry read, "Eric says the river isn't a place, it's a path. He said you never touch the same water twice. I think he's right. The people on this boat all think they're escaping something. Maybe they are. Or maybe the river's just showing us what we've been carrying the whole time." There was no signature. Rivas placed it in the archive with the others. The Wren case was officially closed that summer. Reed Granger's warrant remained active, but there were no further sightings. The river went on flowing. In time, the Celestine was quietly decommissioned for good. Its remains too unstable, too saturated with story to repurpose. A final ceremony was held, just staff and a few of the investigative team. As it was towed from its mooring, Allison snapped a final photo from the shore grains of red and gold light streaking the hull, the paddle wheel motionless. She titled the photo "End of Voyage." That image would become the cover of her memoir published a year later, What the River Took. In it she wrote, "We assume the past lives behind us, but it lives beside us quietly. In film, undeveloped; in names, unspoken; in water, undisturbed. Sometimes it takes a storm to bring it back, sometimes a box in the mud, and sometimes just the refusal to forget." A year after the final closing of the Wren case, Detective Hugo Rivas sat at his desk in the Lafayette precinct, watching light pool through dusty blinds as rain began to pelt the windows, light at first, then harder, as if something unseen was trying to get in. He had read Allison Wade's memoir twice. What the River Took wasn't just a tribute, it was a blueprint of how memory works, of how loss survives when facts are too slow to keep up. It had become a quiet bestseller, particularly among survivors and family members of unsolved cases. Her words were calm, deliberate, never sentimental, but in them was the weight of 30 years and the power of a single object dropped in a storm drain. That afternoon, as the rain flooded into the gutters outside, Rivas opened his drawer and pulled out the final remaining piece of the Celestine case, a yellowing postcard. It had arrived 2 months prior. No postmark, no return address, just tucked into the department's mail bin without fanfare. The photo on the front showed the river at dusk. No text, just a single pen stroke across the top edge, still drifting. He never showed it to the press, not even to Allison. Was it from Granger? Someone else who had known? Or just a cruel echo? The answer didn't matter. Some things were meant to remain half understood, like light breaking through fog. He filed the postcard into a sealed evidence envelope, labeled it, "Supplemental not yet concluded," just in case. Meanwhile, the storm outside had turned serious. Flood alerts buzzed phones. Sirens began to echo from the highway. Across town, public works crews moved to check the usual drains and flood zones. One such site, a newly reinforced grate just a block from where Natalie's compact mirror had first reappeared. This time, nothing washed through it. But not far from there, a boy walking along the rising canal spotted something glinting near the concrete wall. He climbed down carefully and pried it from the mud. A copper ring. Simple, plain. A faint etching on the inside. E+N always. He pocketed it, not knowing its weight, and jogged home through the rain. Across town, Allison Wade stared at her computer screen. She was finishing a photo essay titled, "The Places We Vanish." One of the final pictures was of Natalie's compact, still scratched, still tarnished, but now resting on a velvet square behind museum glass. Her caption read, "The river doesn't bury us, it holds us, waits, until we're ready to return." She hit publish. That night, as water surged beneath the bridges and branches drifted past the pylons in slow, snaking circles, the river carried no more secrets, but it carried memory, and that was enough. Couple vanished on Riverboat Honeymoon in 1985. 28 years later, this washes up in a storm drain, tells the chilling, slow-burning mystery of Natalie and Eric Wren, newlyweds, who boarded a vintage riverboat cruise for their honeymoon and never returned. In 1985, the Celestine quietly recorded their disappearance as a likely accident. No bodies, no signs of struggle, and a river known for swallowing secrets. The case went cold for nearly 3 decades. Then, in 2013, a violent Louisiana storm unclogged a storm drain and exposed Natalie's engraved compact mirror. That single object reignited a dormant investigation. Detective Hugo Rivas re-examined the original case, uncovering discrepancies in the ship's log, a missing 4-hour gap in its journey, and a previously undocumented passenger operating under the name Reed Granger. The deeper Rivas dug, the darker the truth became. Granger, possibly connected to shadowy government work, had boarded the ship under a false identity and was later implicated in the Wren's murder. Key testimonies from a remorseful deckhand and the aging captain revealed an unreported stop at an abandoned wharf and a covert unloading operation that masked something much worse. A hidden journal from Eric, recovered beneath floorboards, documented their growing fear aboard the ship. The eventual discovery of Natalie and Eric's remains in a hidden root cellar confirmed the long-suspected homicide. Yet Granger remained a ghost, surfacing only through scattered sightings, old surveillance images, and one final photo captured on a roll of Natalie's film showing him on a dock watching the river. Through rain rot and river currents, the story unfolds, not just as a crime solved, but a testament to persistence, memory, and the quiet, enduring weight of love. The river may hold its secrets, but eventually someone always looks deep enough to bring them home.